Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Reformer. When I started this podcast a few months ago, I asked my really good friend Gemma, who's a journalist, would she listen to the first couple of episodes and provide a bit of feedback on anything that she thought that we think we could do better. She still listens from what I understand, and she's still really enjoying the conversations. And she rang me up a few weeks ago and she said, you know what, Nick, I would love to interview you because I would love to hear your story. So this week, I'm handing over to Gemma and she is going to ask me the questions. I'm feeling very nervous. We met at university. We studied broadcast journalism together at Leeds, and here we are now. I don't know how many years later it is, Gemma. I think we've gone beyond the counting point.
Too many, I think. Yeah.
Too many years. But Gemma, this is what she does for a living. And I'm just kind of coming back to my journalism roots. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Gemma and she is going to put me on the other side of the interview for this week's episode.
Hello. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
How are you feeling?
I am really nervous, actually. I'm like, so funny because I think, oh, this must be how everyone else feels. And yet when I'm doing the interviewing, I actually feel really relaxed. So yes, my turn to be on the other side today.
Yeah, you're used to taking control, but this time it's my turn. But this should be really easy because you are the expert in this. Take me back, Nick. How did you first encounter Pilates?
Yeah, great question. I first discovered Pilates, I think I was about 22. I was still living in Leeds. So I did broadcast journalism with you at uni. We had a lot of fun with lots of vodka Diet Cokes and minstrels was my memory of university, really. I never left Leeds. So I stayed in Leeds and got a job in marketing. And I had had a car accident. I'd had lots of pain in my neck that didn't really go away. If I look back, I'd had pain in my teens as well. I was someone who always had kind of achy back. I didn't like standing for long periods of time. And after this car accident, I went to see a physiotherapist who was doing some of the exercises with me. And she was like, oh, this is part of this thing called Pilates. And I remember, I'm not sure I quite agree with her explanation, but she said like, you know, a class is like level 10. This is like level 2. But I really liked it. And so I then kind of was like, oh, I wonder like if there are these classes around. And I found a gym down the road from me. I think it was Virgin Active Gyms actually. And they had a Pilates class on and I went. And Heber, who I actually interviewed on the podcast, she was the teacher. And I look back and I think I'm so lucky because I had her. And then soon after I found Claire Sparrow, who's also been on the podcast. I think how lucky that I just happened to find these teachers who have become some of the greats in our industry. But I went in and it was just a mat class and I loved it. And I think I realized that I was very confused about movement and fitness and well-being at that point. And I think I was definitely brought up, and I think a lot of girls in particular were brought up like this, where you always achieve more if you do more. And the more effort you put in, the more effort you'll get out, whatever part of your life it is. So I had that approach in work. I had that approach in fitness. If I didn't like my body, I thought, oh, it's because I need to do more. So I was, you know, at the gym 3-4 times a week.
I remember you doing that all the way through university. You were always at the gym when you weren't in lectures.
If I look back, I was probably the most overweight I'd ever been. I definitely was unhealthy. I was exhausted. And so I now look back with the understanding that I've learned, and I realize that I just constantly burned myself out. Like they say that you get good at what you practice, and I practiced exhaustion. Like I did everything because I thought that's what was going to make me successful. And I think Pilates was genuinely the thing that started to turn the tide on this and started to make me think, this feels really nice. Like I enjoy going. And I hear this from clients all the time. It's the only thing I've ever stuck at. Possibly part of the reason I get the results is because I keep at it. There's other reasons I get results. I now understand, like I balanced my nervous system by slowing down. And really, that's when I discovered Pilates and loved it as a client with no real plans to ever do anything more than that. But kind of went to that gym and then I thought to myself, oh, I've got really good at this now. So I then tried to find an advanced Pilates class because I thought, God, I'm really good at this. And that's actually how I ended up finding Claire Sparrow. She ran this advanced class in a church hall. One day she was running a competition and I won a 1-to-1 with her. And that was the first time I ever went on the equipment. I mean, we're talking about 20 years ago now, this.
Yeah, so it wasn't as big as it is now, is it?
We're so lucky that in Leeds we even had this, because when I moved to Bristol like 15 years ago, there was nothing here, you know? So we were really lucky in Leeds that we had lots of these really great studios. So after having that reformer experience, I then thought, let's see if I can do this. And just happened to find a studio in Leeds city centre that had reformers. And I went almost every lunchtime. And I realized it was really helping me manage what I now realize were my stress levels of, marketing is a full-on job, lots of pressure. You don't know when you're going to finish your day. Your life isn't really your own. Your life is your client's. I used to block out an hour and a half as if it was a meeting in my diary. I'd had permission from my boss to do it. So people didn't book anything in. And I would go almost every day. And it really helped me because I worked long hours. And at least I knew that when I finished my day, whatever time that was, I had a workout. I'd kind of been helping my pain. And how I framed it to my boss was I said, look, I cannot go because I had to take a slightly longer lunch break. I said, I cannot go, and you're going to give me medical time off to go and see physios for this pain, or you can let me do this 3 times a week and I'll have 15 minutes extra lunch. I'm staying till 7, 8 o'clock at night anyway, then I'll feel better and you'll get more performance out of me. So really that was my first sort of experience of Pilates.
So at that point, you had a fairly successful job in marketing. Pilates was just a hobby at this point, wasn't it? How did you go from that to thinking this could be a bit more?
Yeah. So Claire Sparrow, like I said, had been my teacher. She's in the first episode of the podcast. And she said to me one day, like, I think you should think about teaching. And I said, no, no, no. Like, I'm going to be like a marketing director. I'm going to be the CEO of a company. And she was like, no, I really think you should think about it. And it was just such a random thing. I don't really know where it came from her. And it just sat with me. I think I was really interested in this thing that had started to transform me beyond just the physicality. And I thought, I want to learn more about it. And when people ring me up and have a call with me and they say that, they almost say the exact same thing. And I say, they make the best teachers, because I guess you go into it from this place of truth of, I love what Pilates is about and I'm just interested to learn more. And I was so lucky with Claire because Claire then guided me to Polestar Pilates. They just happened to be running a course up in Leeds. It was one of the first times they did it. And I signed up to it. And then I pulled out because I just thought, I'm not ready. Like, it's a big ask. I'd just broken up with a long-term boyfriend. I felt like, it's too much. And again, it was just this thing in my ear. It just wouldn't go away. And I always say to people, if you keep coming back to the same thought, then you have to listen to it. And that's happened to this podcast is part of that. Saying, I have these ideas of these different thoughts. And Pilates training was that for me. So I then did my training at Claire's studio. She actually was off on maternity leave, so it wasn't with her, but I did my training there. It was just this immense training. I think I suddenly was so lucky to be working with Diane Nye and Liz Buzzy, and I was able to really go deep with this work. And through that, and working across all the different pieces of equipment and understanding Pilates far more than a group setup, I mean, I genuinely got rid of my chronic pain, which the Pilates classes had got it to probably 60% improved, but it was really understanding what each movement in Pilates is about and what it is designed to teach you. It's not just exercise, it's movement patterns in your body and helping your body and your nervous system figure out maybe what movement patterns you're not doing so well, and then learning to do them better. I started to then realize what movement could do, that it wasn't just a case of exercise to make yourself thinner or exercise to give you endorphins, but actually it was so much more than that, that it could reprogram how you were. Suddenly I went from this is a plan B, I'm interested in learning more about it, to being like, I have to do this for more people because I have to show people what can be done. And I think part of this podcast is my continuation of that. That's really has been my mission. I felt very passionate that this is what I'm here to do. I am here through my studios, through my teacher training, and hopefully now through this podcast to get people out there realizing how we can really help people, because people feel like me very stuck and very like, this is how it is, and this is how I'm meant to live, and this is how I'm meant to be. And I want to hopefully show them that no, we can empower them to understand why you got yourself in a bit of a pickle and how you can get yourself out of it. And I don't really think there's many people out there who were talking about movement like that. There are some. Despite the big boom in Pilates, I don't really think that is the boom of the message. The boom of the message is you're going to look smoking hot in a crop top and leggings. But that's, for me, not what my mission is, for sure. And so that's kind of what happened. And then the training happened. And then I moved to Bristol with no intention of even opening a studio at this point. But I got a job in marketing, and then I moved to the city I still live in, and there were no studios. And I suddenly had no studio to go to at lunch, like nothing. I'd gone from a choice in Leeds to nothing. And so I think over about the period of about a year, I thought, I'm going to have to do this because I actually can't do my marketing job without this support of Pilates for me.
Was it this point then that it sort of went from being a plan B to perhaps becoming more of a plan A, do you think?
I think it was. Interestingly, my back pain and my neck pain kind of came back because I wasn't doing Pilates in the same way. Even though at this point, I was still finalizing my training and doing my practice hours and things like that, but I didn't really have a studio to go to like I had in Leeds. I got recommended an osteopath that was across the square. I'm in this beautiful square in Bristol where my office was when I was in marketing, and it was just across the square. And I just happened to have the owner of the osteopaths was my osteopath. And over time, he was like, "Why don't you open a studio here?" And I was like, "No, I've got this job. This is what I'm doing." And then he said, "Look, why don't you just put a class on? We've got this little space." So I put a mat class on a Monday evening, and that was my way of helping me get my hours and practicing. And I loved it. And he just kept saying, "Look, we've got this space for you." I remember I went in, it was January, and I went into one of my reviews. It's so funny when you work in the corporate world because you can go into these reviews and they can be basically saying like, "You're fabulous, but let me tell you the like teeny weeny things that you don't do right." I just find that really infuriating. Like I really try and mind that in my management style because I know we have to give people some constructive feedback, but there's a way to do it. And I remember this review was done. I mean, it was handled badly. It was like done in a restaurant, so it wasn't private. And they were saying that I had like transformed this digital team and I'd done really well, but they picked me up on just, I don't know, just a few silly things. And I remember walking out, vividly walking out of that restaurant, and I just had this clear message in my head that said, "You have to do this jumping in with 2 feet. You can't try and do part-time this and part-time that." And I used to find it quite hard in my training managing what I used to call like the bullshit business world and then the energetic healing world. Like energetically, they were quite opposed. And often in a day, and I see this with my students, they're in the business world and then they kind of have to come and they're trying to get their hours in, but it can fry you energetically because you're switching. And so I really had this real clear moment and I handed my notice in a week later.
That is a huge decision, though, isn't it? I mean, to go from having a really stable job with a good income to where you're only running a couple of classes at a studio that's just, you're finding your feet.
Yeah, I felt very like guided with this. Like I do feel like I get quite clear sort of intuition and I'm pretty good at listening to it. At the time I had a boyfriend and so we had discussed like financially we could make it work between us. About a month into my notice, we broke up. And I remember my mum ringing me up being like, "Would you think they'll take you back because you're going to do this job and you've got no clients, you've got no, like, how are you going to keep going?" And I just said to her like, "I don't know, I just know this is going to be okay." People say you have about 3 years to make a profit in business and you're doing pretty well, and no word of a lie, I had 3 months and I had to, before I would run out of money. But at this point I was committed. I'd handed my notice in, I'd taken on this lease. I was really lucky because this space that I first opened in, they are the loveliest people. So it was kind of, I wasn't signing a 10-year lease. My newest studio is that kind of decision. And that's very scary. I don't know how studio owners are making those decisions out of the blocks. And I actually had some great advice from my boss was amazing from this marketing agency. And he said to me, and I've given this advice to so many people, he said to me, "Nick, when you open a business, be as lean as you can with all your spend. Once you're making money, you can then make it look prettier and, invest in different things." And that's just what I did. I had this very small room that wasn't very sexy, but in a beautiful building, in a beautiful area. I managed to find the money to put the equipment in. And it was just me teaching, it got to about 35 hours a week, which is too much, but that's what I did before we brought anybody else in. Because exactly that, I was like, I have to pay my mortgage. I'm on my own now. Again, I think I just had this, I kept coming back to these same ideas, Gemma, and I was like, I can't not do it. I haven't got a choice.
So you almost got a studio by default in a way. You went very quickly from teacher training to having a studio.
I had signed my lease before I'd done my Polestar exam. And I went into my exam thinking, I cannot mess this up. I did my exam in the March, April, and we opened in May, but I'd already signed the lease. So, sometimes you have to be like, I'm committed now. We have to just keep going.
Just throw yourself into it. And what was it like in those early years then of owning your first studio?
I'd moved to Bristol only like a year and a half before. So my friendship group really was in the office that I was in. And, you forget how much camaraderie and interaction you have in an office, especially in a marketing office. They're really cool. We do lots of cool things. We go for drinks, we have pizzas, we do all this stuff. And then suddenly I'm literally in a room by myself. That's what a Pilates studio is. Like, it is quite a lonely existence, or it can be. Like, you can be very much on your own. I was teaching a lot of privates. And so I'd have these clients come in. Many of them are still with us today, which is fantastic. It's not that we can't be friends with them, but we're not there to chat about our lives. Like, they're paying for our time and for themselves. But I remember the business was not sound, but I opened with a £135 a month unlimited. And there was this one person who came, Claire, and she came twice a day for the 4 days a week I was open. And we're still really good friends. She's my daughter's godmother. And I have actually many of the friends from those days, many of the clients who came to group classes in particular, like, they did become really great friends. And I started to realize what you do when you create a studio is you kind of get to set the vibe, you get to set the energy, you get to attract, hopefully, the like-minded people in. And I think that's why so many, there's 4 or 5 people that I all met through Soul who I guess came in with a similar energy, kind of, vibe for life. But it was very like the Nick show, it was just me. And then over time, I started to add in a few teachers for the hours I wasn't there and kind of started to grow it like that. But yeah, for the first few years, it was like that. It really didn't make very much money. I think what I often say to studios owners is when it's just you teaching, it's kind of an easier business model because pricing wise and things like that, your outgoings and then whatever you charge and you're kind of left with. So actually that small studio worked really, really well. I didn't make loads of money, but I paid my mortgage and I got to do something I loved and I was really happy with the job. But then once I was pregnant with my first child, I thought, well, I'll just make this like the other studios that are out there, right? Because I can have other teachers that are in here and they'll be teaching while I'm not here. And this business will make me money when I'm not here. And really, that was a pivotal point because that didn't work. The studio was too small to have enough profit to actually pay the teachers a fair wage and have anything left for me, who was then running the business. And so that's when I realized things had to change a little bit.
I guess that's really hard though, because at that point you're going from being a Pilates teacher and a studio owner to suddenly having to really make that leap, aren't you, into the world of business, sort of taking yourself away from the thing that you love the most, the teaching.
I think that's such a good point because teachers go into opening studios without fully understanding that running a studio is a completely different discipline to being a really good teacher. Being a really good teacher doesn't necessarily make a really good and successful studio. I think because of my background, I've always loved the challenge of getting a business to run well as wanting to be a teacher. But most of the time, once your studios expand, you do have to step back from the teaching. I know there's some people who disagree with me, but I do feel strongly about that because you can't work on your business when you're in your business all the time. So you're having to kind of try and balance that out. But I know there's plenty of teachers who give up teaching completely. I didn't want to do that. But the skill of being a studio owner is very different. You go a little bit back into those different energies again. If you then have a team, you're a manager. If there's problems, you have to have those difficult conversations. You're also having to be really good at your business structure, your pricing structure, so that anyone who works for you, like their livelihood depends on the work being there, them being paid on time. You have to have your business structure nailed. I'd always wanted to open a reformer studio because there wasn't any in Bristol. So I'd opened it just before COVID, closed it 2 days into COVID. And then as we came out, I actually realized that I wanted to run the business better. I felt like my background meant that I was quite good at business, and I felt like I did all right. But I've since learned from going on some various masterminds around being a boutique fitness studio owner that there's an awful lot of training that goes into, being a really good studio owner. And I think there's not a lot of that being mentioned in any of the teacher trainings at all. And yet people, I think, are naively going in to open studios. I believe the statistic is 83% of Pilates studios are not profitable. And yet, I mean, in my city, there's a new one opening almost every month. And you don't want to see people go out of business. They'll have invested a lot of money into opening those businesses. And so I think they're two different skill sets. I've loved trying to figure both out. But I think that's something for people who are listening to think about if they are looking to open a studio. It's a tricky skill set for sure.
Let's take a step back, because you were talking about at that point, you just started a family, you just had your first child. And then, I mean, this is crazy. You were pregnant, you just had your second child, and you opened a studio within a matter of days. Talk to me about how all that happened. And not only that, we then went into lockdown.
Like I said, I'd had this studio that was just me. I then got pregnant with my first child, still had this one studio. Absolutely naively was like thinking I just have all this time off in maternity leave. And so I really was back working within days, not teaching, but working and running the business. So I started looking for once I was back with her and, everything was back up and running. I was really determined. Like I said, I realized the business didn't really work so well as a very small one-to-one type studio with all these other teachers. I also felt like I really wanted to bring Reformer to Bristol. And so I'd gone on this hunt to find a studio. I don't know how people find studios so quickly. I spend a long time finding studios because they need to look right. They need to have the right energy, but they absolutely have to stand up business wise. And often they don't at all. And so I'd seen loads and loads of studios and it was like banging my head against a brick wall. I thought, I've got this money. I'm ready to invest. Like, why can't I find the right thing? I then found out I was pregnant with my second child and I gave up the hunt. But I got an email from a building that I've walked past 100 times, not far from my home, this beautiful building. And months and months and months before this, I had found that there were builders in there and I'd sent an email in saying, hey, I'm looking for this studio. Do you think you might have something? And he came back and said, I might do, but I'm nowhere near being able to show you yet. I forgot about it, stopped looking, but I got this email and I thought, I have walked past this building so many times. Like, I'm just nosy. I want to look in. So I was the first member of the public to ever see inside of where our Bishopston studio is now. And I walked in with no intention. Like, I'd stopped looking and thought, oh God, this is it. This is the studio. And then I said, when's it going to be ready? And they basically said, my son's due date. And I came home and I said, oh, to my husband, I think I found a studio. The thing is, it's going to be ready basically when I'm about to have the baby. And I said, the thing is, if it was 9 months later, 12 months later, no one would question this decision. I said, I can't lose it. Like, we got to find a way to make it work. I was determined to not make the mistakes I'd made previously with maternity. So I had hired someone. So I thought, I'll get this studio up and running and I'll have someone then step in to take over and I'll have my maternity leave. And like all building projects, it ran a bit late. So we opened when my son was 7 weeks old, which was mental, to be fair. And I was like breastfeeding, talking to builders and, all the things. I remember the open weekend we had. My family are Irish. So in Ireland, they'd already started talking about COVID and lockdowns. And obviously we were still cracking on being like, oh no, we're fine. So we did this open weekend while that was going on. I ended up hospitalized. I actually perforated my eardrum. I think I was so burnt out. But I remember thinking, right, I'm going to do this weekend and then I've got someone stepping in and I'm going to have the maternity leave that I had planned. And I remember on the Monday it being like, oh, I feel like maybe this is becoming a thing. And then on the Tuesday, which I think was St. Patrick's Day, I made the decision to close before we officially did. I thought, you know what, in Ireland, this is what they're saying. Like, I need to do the right thing. I don't think it's right to be bringing people in. So we closed. And suddenly, because I had so many people saying, oh, it must have been really great for you then, because then you were off and you got the maternity leave. I had a whole team of teachers who then were like, can you pivot us online? And I mean, I was dead. I had run out of all energy. I remember being on a phone call, like, to my team in tears. I don't think they'd ever heard me break. And I was like, you're asking from me what the government can't tell you. Like, I can't do this. But within a week or so, I got us online. It was fine, really. And we were able to kind of step back, and it did tick over. It was really hard financially because whereas, like, when you've got a bricks and mortar studio, you've got the advantage of, if you're close to where people live, then people are going to come to you. And if you're good, even better, right? Like, that's part of it. When online happened, suddenly, like, people could go anywhere. And people were like, oh, I'll charge £2 for a class. And other people were like, I'll charge £15 for a class. But suddenly the mechanics of the finances were all different. And the conversations with teachers were difficult. I'm like, I can't pay you what we paid before. I remember saying, I will give you every penny of what we've earned. But the government gave us, as business directors, like, we didn't get any money. So I actually didn't get anything. The teachers got what they could get. But then it calmed down and it settled. And I actually then was able to go into the studio, moved all the reformers away, managed to get a grant to hire some really nice photographic equipment. It was the only bit of money we did get. And we then created Soul at Home. And so I filmed everything in quality. Even when we did live classes, we also filmed them like in 4K and then edited them. And so that was really nice. But then it was the question of, when do we come back? And if anyone remembers, like, that was really tough. Like, it was many times where we thought it was going to happen and then we'd get sort of closed down again. But we did then eventually open. I think it was May 2021. And like I said, it was that point where I thought, when I open, I want to do things differently. I had this feeling before, like, our business model was, we do really, really great Pilates. And if you like us, come back. And I learned that that isn't a business model at all, that there is a lot of strategy around, what is your intro offer? What is your process from that intro into guiding them into becoming a member? How do you get them to make a commitment? And we shifted to a membership model. And that has transformed the business, because we never had financial visibility before, because when people bought 10 packs was all over the place, and then they'd be away for 2 weeks and then they wouldn't get back into the habit. And so honestly, when you looked at our numbers year on year, there was no patterns. When we shifted to a membership model, we then had visibility. We started every month with income. We didn't start at zero. And that for me was a huge, huge shift. And there's been a huge shift in the kind of recruitment that we've needed around that. So when we came back, it was a great opportunity to sort of say, let's do this differently, different pricing, different structure. And actually, what was really lovely post-COVID was people really valued their well-being in a way that they maybe hadn't before. And they were ready to make a commitment to themselves. And really, that's been what's allowed us to then keep growing from then on. So it ended up being a real positive experience in the end.
And did you have any like real business mentors that helped you sort of see the way forward and be able to make that change?
I did. I'm desperately trying to get her on the podcast. We are arranging it. I signed up to Studio Grow. They do a mastermind. They do often like a free 3-day, like all online businesses do this, like free 3-day thing. Because it was COVID, like, I actually could do it. And I thought, this is really good. I'd listened to Lisa Kika, who runs it, for years on her podcast. I'd heard her talk about a lot of the things that I'm saying to you, membership, like all this stuff. And I had memberships. A, I didn't sell very many. And B, the pricing, like I said to you earlier, was way out. So it was never going to work. And so I did this free 3-day course. They don't do it anymore. They did like this 6-week intensive, and it was intensive, but it worked because we were off for COVID. We could do it, where setting up your systems, your structure, your pricing, all the things. And so we did that. I mean, once I'd done this, I was like, I can't leave this system. So I then signed up to the Studio Grow Mastermind, which for me has been absolutely, life-changing. It's completely changed the business, my life, my role. They work with studios across all boutique fitness the world over. And I think when you're a business owner, so much of what you do is test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. When I had children, I think that was the real point where I was like, I ain't got time for all this testing and learning. Because I think before kids, I just felt like I had indefinite time. Whereas after kids, like your time is much more restricted. And really, what I felt like I got with Studio Grow was so many hours of testing already done for you. And it's like, here's a process, here's a structure. Have we played with them a little bit? Yes, we do. But fundamentally, they absolutely work. And so I've now been with Studio Grow. I think I'm coming into my 4th year. They have helped me, strategize the teacher training. They helped me with the launch of the new studio. Like I opened my new studio profitable because they helped me pre-sell it in a way that meant we already had memberships that at least paid our way and a little bit more. So it's been really great working with them and understanding the depth that is in our business. What I've realized about Pilates studios is it's actually quite a complex business in a way because you've got people coming with all their individual needs. Like it's not like a shop where it's quite a straightforward journey to purchase. Like the journey to purchasing in Pilates is quite different depending on different people. And so the sort of structure that you need around that isn't as obvious as it might seem. And so working with these business coaches who are just really well versed in this. I was so lucky because I was one of the first people on it. I got to work with Lisa a lot direct. I mean, now there's lots of coaches and they're all learning from Lisa as well, where she had studios and she sort of learned a lot of this, but also they're learning from all of us as their clients and putting that into the mix. And so you're getting to build off the back of that, which I have just found really great. And I think one of the things that I have definitely learned, and I wish I had learned earlier, is spending money on mentoring is the best money you can spend. These masterminds are very expensive. I had paid it back in 2 months. I ran a campaign I would never have run, sold it in a way I never would have sold, and it made the money back. And I thought, okay, there's something in this. And whether it's mentoring for business or whether it's mentoring for your teaching, when I wrote my teacher training course, I then got a mentor for that and another educator to help me. And I think back to what I was saying at the beginning of our conversation about how lonely this can feel, it's really good to surround yourself with people who can help you. I think that's why even if you have your own business, it's great to work for a studio. Like our studio, we put a lot of continuing education things on and support for our teachers. But even, having a mentor on your teaching, having a mentor if you're running the business, I think it's really important. And it does feel like a lot of money, but otherwise I now look back and you are absolutely shooting in the dark and just trying to see if anything sticks.
When you look at the timeline of what you've done, you've now opened a 3rd studio. You've also started your own teacher training. What do you think are the biggest lessons that you've learned over the last 10 years since you first opened?
I measure everything. I look to analyze everything. I like growth, but I think I have definitely been a little guilty in the past of like the next shiny thing, the next shiny thing. And then you can get a bit distracted. So I think just being clear on what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve is helpful and just staying really focused on that. I think part of my success is I'm the sort of person who has an idea and wants it done yesterday, but that was what made me burn out and still does. And so one of my team members, she is brilliant at being like, even the podcast, she was like, Nick, we're not launching it in November. I'm putting it in for June. And I did it in May 2025. But I think it's just putting things out, writing them down, planning it out and putting space around it. I think space is so helpful as a studio owner to be able to make decisions. And often when I go away on holiday and I'm able to switch off a little bit, that's often what I reflect on is, okay, how do I carve out some more space? And often it is making some shifts to maybe my hours or where I'm at, or, the new studio was again just filled up all the space I had created. So I've had to redo that. So I think that's been a part of it is just being able to take a step back and find space. I think, as I said before, having mentors has been a huge part of this for me. And I think that has been my biggest lesson, that mentors in the different areas that you're struggling with. Like I've had business mentors, I've had teacher training mentors. I also kind of have like almost like a therapist mentor who I often will talk business decisions through. She's not a business coach, but she will help me with like energetically, does this feel right for me? Is this what I want? I think not being afraid to clear some of that stuff so that you're just really clear on where you're going.
You've talked a lot in the podcast about burnout. Do you think that's kind of like your niche? That's something that you can really help your clients with?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think that I'm listening to all these experts and they're talking about their niches, their niches. And I reflect and think, oh, what would my niche be? And I thought the same thing. I was like, burnout Pilates, that would be me. Because it was, I mean, I look back at even my teenage, I had a tricky childhood, but even at school, like, unless I was the best, my mum said I'd come home and get 9 out of 10 and be like, why didn't I get 10 out of 10? I always had this inside of me that like I have to keep striving for more and more and more, which I suppose, like, when you're the mother of a child is good. Like, then they're academic and that's kind of good. But I think I had never really understood that that isn't healthy, actually. And I was always getting ill. So from about the age of 13, I was always getting severe tonsillitis. And it got to the point where even if I had like a really late night, I'd get tonsillitis. If I was stressed, I'd get tonsillitis. Like, that was my pattern my whole teenage life. And then during my A levels, like I said, I had kind of back pain and neck pain. But I actually missed my last physics A level because I was in hospital with really severe tonsillitis. And I now look back and I can see that, yes, at 19, they decided to take my tonsils out. Possibly my tonsils weren't really the problem, because I then went to uni and I found uni hard. My family at this point had moved back to Ireland. So I was kind of in the country on my own. And I just don't think I had a practice to help me feel good, help me feel grounded. I'm then out of my comfort zone. University's a big leap. You're on your own. Even your education is on you. And then, like, we did broadcast journalism. So we all had jobs during it. So I was the traffic and travel girl. So I was up at 4 a.m. And then on Sundays, I read the news on the radio as well. And so, I mean, this sounds cool, but I was a student. So I was also then going to uni and then coming back and having a nap. I remember even trying to watch like the telly, because I mean, bearing in mind, there was only live telly then, and like the good telly was on at like 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, well, I can't stay up till 10 o'clock at night because I have to be up at 3:30 to go to work. And so I think I just always had this kind of burnout life. I then went into marketing. And again, it's like, well, if you want to be the best, like, I think I just always been brought up like that. That's no disrespect to how I was brought up, but I think we were often the first generation of women that could kind of have it all. If you were intelligent, there was no question you were going to uni. I remember my mum saying, well, you'll be the CEO and you'll have a nanny and, you'll have the helpers and you'll be able to do this and you'll have this big job. But was that even what I wanted? I don't know. And so I think I just always had this like push, 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 push until I mean, I would get sick a lot. I had lots of digestive problems, I think pain in my body. I remember trying to get to these big advanced moves for Pilates. So when you do Polestar, it takes a long time because they want you to be able to do all the movements to perfection, which is a big ask. But what it does do is it takes you on this journey to healing yourself in a way that is incredible. And I learned when I remember getting panicked about these big moves, and I started to realize that through really Diane was my huge mentor for this, that you get better at them by finding the ease in them. If everything can feel easy, then you'll have something left in the tank for when you want to challenge yourself. But if like the basic moves feel hard because we're conditioned to feel like harder is better, you don't get anything unless you do more, then no wonder when you then take a leg away or take an arm away or change a spring, like you can't do it because you've not trained yourself any efficiency. And so I really learned that efficiency was the key. And I started to see it play out in Pilates. I started to see that, yeah, like if I make this chest lift feel easier, then I've got something left to give. And I could see that transforming into some of the more advanced moves. And I remember thinking, I wonder if this is true for all life. And the truth is, it is true for all life. That if we can be efficient, we can have something left in the tank. We can train ourselves. So I'm not saying everyone has to follow this, Gemma. I know there are people who can push themselves to excess in sports and their bodies can cope with it, but I'm not one of them. And my body, when I push it, it pushes back, probably because energetically, that's how I am in life. And so I realized through movement that I had to stop taking myself to exhaustion. And the weird thing was, when I learned to find the ease in movement, when I felt more like I'd had a massage than a workout, my body did change. I got thinner. I got more toned. I got the things that I was trying to do by the pushing. And I thought, I have been lied to my entire life. And I think it was how movement, how Pilates, how something that, it's exercise really, how that shifted my entire being. And don't get me wrong, I am still the person on the edge of going towards burnout, but I pull myself back. And it happened recently. I think the opening of the third studio, the teacher training, I don't think I quite planned the year properly. I don't think I planned the team structure properly, and I've had to make a lot of changes. And I think I'm nearly there now with it, so it is better. But during it, it's been a lot, too much. And I had this moment actually. So my Martine, who is my woman who I speak to, who's not in this, but she's my sort of, I've worked with her for years. And she said to me, I hear you on the podcast, Nick, and you talk about how it was Pilates that helped your burnout. Because I was going to her with, let's do some meditation. And so actually, I've brought back 15 minutes a day of mat practice. And you know what? It works. And it is the basic moves. It's the bridges, the chest lifts, the book openings. It's not the crazy, fancy, sexy stuff. It's the softness, it's the breath. And you know what? My digestion feels better. And I think it's, again, that stopping pushing yourself to the edge of it. And I think really for me, that's where the burnout Pilates niche, I guess, for me has come. And I think that's what Soul really is about. My studios, people come, we meet them where they're at. They feel relaxed. They feel at ease in themselves. And yet they do see changes that they're wanting, but it kind of comes from a very, very different place. And I think that's why our studio, we don't really lose members. They come and they stay, because who doesn't want to feel like that? Who doesn't want to feel rested and energized and start to see changes in their body at the same time?
That's great that you've recognized that in yourself. But I have to say, every time I speak to you, 1 month it'll be, I'm completely happy, the business is going really well. And the next month you've added in 5 more things to make your life even more complicated. What's next?
No, you're so right. I am a bugger for filling up space. It's so funny. Like when I meditate and think about, I don't meditate as often as I should, but when I do, and I think about like, what is my goal? The same word comes up and has done for probably 15 years. And the word is space. I want space in my life around me. I find it very overwhelming when I don't have space. And yet, as soon as I get space, you're right, I go, oh, what can I do? What can I do? I'm trying my best, Gemma, to not do so much of that. I think for now, I'm pausing any more bricks and mortar studios for now. And for me, though, the podcast has been genuinely this just joyful thing to do. I have loved having conversations with people that I'm really inspired by. I love all the messages that we get from people who are listening, and some real loyal listeners who are like, every Monday, you're like my dog walk, which is just great. And so I think the podcast is my big piece. I've been invited to go to LA to an event there. I'm going up to Scotland in a few weeks to an event there. And so I'm really keen to kind of explore that. And for me, my other real passion project is, and hopefully this comes across in the conversations that I'm having, I'm really passionate about producing phenomenal Pilates teachers that understand the depth of this work. And so I've loved running the teacher training, and we're now being asked, would we license the teacher training content to other studios? And so for me, that's my next area of growth, is to actually bring soul education beyond the Bristol studio. We're looking at doing something in Yorkshire. We're looking at doing something maybe in Oxfordshire. And so I think working with studio owners to mentor them to become educators, where they can then run the course and be mentored by us and be able to also produce great teachers. Because I've always wanted the business to be able to pay its way. I mean, you're silly if you don't want it to do that. But I always got into this really because I was passionate about what had been done for me, and I wanted to do it for more people. And I realized that even if I opened 50 studios, I could only touch so many people. And so I think through getting education out there and empowering other studios to run education for themselves, we will then be able to get this message out. Because these teachers, and I genuinely mean this, these teachers with depth, they will continue past this boom. The teachers who are doing the 2 weekend courses and the studios who are being run by those kind of teachers, that's a boom. We've seen it in bar. We've seen it in lots of other movement practices. Pilates won't go because Pilates has been going a long time, but you need the depth. You need the depth to change people's lives because people are always going to need that. So for me, that's my plans for the next year, Gems.
And just finally, then, looking back over the last 10 years, what have been the biggest shifts that you've seen in the industry as a whole?
The biggest shifts really have been the growth of Pilates. I saw a stat the other day that is in the last 10 years, it's a 91% growth in Pilates. Like we were saying, 10 years ago when I opened, there weren't even any studios in Bristol. Now, I think there's 10 or 11 or 12 or something. There's loads. So I think the growth of it is great. 10 years ago, I was having to educate what Pilates was and what equipment was. When we opened the Reformer studio in this city, no one even knew what Reformer was. Everyone was a beginner. Now it's very different. You know, there's lots of studios with different styles of what they're teaching, and people are coming and going. So it's been a big shift, really. And also, a topic that's come up a lot on the podcast is there is no regulation. So studios are now running their own teacher training programs. Like myself, I'm doing it too. Like, I get it, but there's no regulation. So whether it's a weekend or a year or 2 weekends, whether there's a written exam or there's not a written exam, what the criteria is to pass an in-person exam, or is it done on video? Like, none of that exists. And so it's become quite a complicated place. And what upsets me a little bit is I think of my physio mentioning Pilates. I think if I went to a gym, okay, it was just a gym, it was not even a specialist studio. And then I went to a specialist studio later. And what that did for me and the journey it took me on versus some of the more dynamic fitness-based Pilates. So it's called Pilates because it's on Pilates equipment, but it's not really any of the Pilates repertoire. That's not to give it a diss. I enjoy those classes. I go to them. I think they're fun. But if you're a person who's been told go to Pilates, it's going to help your back, that's not going to help you. And how is that client supposed to know the difference? Because it's all the same name. So I think that's really the big difference. And part of the reason I'm having these conversations is I'd really like studio owners to do a better job of making it clear on their homepage, like what their classes are about, so that clients can feel informed. But as Claire Sparrow said to me in our interview, the challenge is some of the teachers aren't informed because, in fairness to the teachers, you only know what you know. So if you've gone on a 2 weekend course, but you've been told this is the depth, this is what Pilates is about, this is the ethos, like you think what you've learned is it. I'm hoping that through conversations with my views, but also other people's views, that it will open people's eyes up to the breadth that there is. And then we can be maybe a bit clearer so that clients can make the right decision on like where they go to, and people who are thinking about doing a training can make the right decision on what training they're going to go to as well, you know? So I think that for me has been the biggest shift. Also, mat Pilates was really big, and now it's all about reformer, like reformer everywhere. I think some of the other pieces of equipment, I mean, my first studio was every piece of equipment. Now we're starting to look at, do we bring in chairs? Do we bring in trapeze? If you've been in America, they've been doing this for a while. Australia's been doing this for a while. So here in the UK, that's a big shift as well, is starting to get people to see the wider system of Pilates, which I think that's a great addition.
We end every podcast with some quick fire questions. This is your turn to have them back at you. What's the most influential piece of advice you've been given, and by who?
I mentioned it before. There's one bit of business advice, which was from my old boss, that was, when you open a business, be lean with everything and borrow as little as you can. And then when you make money, reinvest it in. And I think that was so great. And I think another piece of advice for me is by Martine, who, like I said, is my kind of, I don't know what you'd call her, my spiritual coach. She was my therapist in the past. Like, I still see her once a month. She's fabulous. And she said something along the lines of, if it's a good idea, it will be a good idea next month, and it will be a good idea next year. And that's my way of stopping me running too quickly.
Okay, so what's the most profound gift then that Pilates has given you?
I think, like I've shared on the episode today, it has been to understand my body, to understand my energetics, to understand myself more. And I think that's what this practice does. When it slows you down, when you tune in, you feel all of that stuff. it also helps you tune into what is your body telling you. People talk about their gut feeling. People know what a gut feeling is. Like, your gut feeling is when you tune in and you just kind of get a sense of something. And I've had that so many times in my life. And really, Pilates is what's facilitated that, because it is the when you slow down, when you breathe, when you're invited to tune into your body. I always joke in my classes, when you tune into your body, you're not just tuning into, oh, my back feels tight, maybe I should stretch it. You could think about it like, is my back trying to tell me something? What's the message my back wants to tell me? Like, hey, shoulder, I hear you. What are you telling me? And this sounds really woo-woo if you're not in our world, but those of you who are will know what I mean. And when we look at chronic pain, we know from all the science that chronic pain is emotional. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It is stored, and unless we help release it. And so we can tune in and we can let our body guide us on, do I need to change my jobs? Am I happy in my marriage? Like, should I leave my job and open a Pilates studio? But that's really what Pilates did for me. It slowed me down enough to tune in and to be able to trust my gut feeling on things.
Well, I definitely feel like I had a gut feeling to come and sit next to you in the University of Leeds in one of those lectures, and 20 plus years we're still here. Listen, if you could go back and give your younger self some advice, what would it be?
Probably just that it's all going to be okay. I think it's scary running a business. It's scary, even at school, figuring out what you want to do. And my journey's definitely not been very linear. I was set to go and do engineering. I changed my mind. I went to Leeds and did broadcast journalism. I then left that and did marketing. And then I opened a Pilates studio. But the thing is, everything brings you to where you're meant to be. It makes for a more interesting character. So I think thinking that you need to have everything figured out, you just don't. Just keep going and it will all be okay.
That feels like a great way to end it. It'll all be okay. Listen, I know lots of people have been sending in questions and they want to ask you anything. So I'm sure we'd be able to do this again if people have more questions that I've missed out.
I know. Well, I'm getting DMs now, and it's really great because it's giving me some fodder for like solo episodes and like doing stuff like this again. But yeah, I hope that kind of gives people, I guess, the story of Soul Pilates, really, because I think clients every now and again, they've been with us for years, will go, oh, it's called soul for a reason. Because I guess that knowing yourself and tuning into yourself, like, that is your soul. And I remember hearing Oprah once say something along the lines of, what is your soul's purpose? Like, she said to God or something one day, like, I'm here, use me. What do you want me to do for you? And I don't know why this stuck with me. I was in my probably early 20s. And I remember kind of thinking, I think this is what I'm meant to do. This is my mission. And I think if you can find something that you love, that you've got to be decent at it, and that allows you to feel like you're making a change, then that's really helpful. And I guess that's what Soul Pilates, that's kind of why it's called it, really. So yeah, hopefully I've explained a little bit more about my story. And thank you so much for being the journalist extraordinaire.
Oh, it's been really fun. It's been nice to ask you all those questions that sometimes you don't have time to talk about.
Yeah, are we going to get you doing some Pilates?
Soul at home.
You could do soul at home. I think I've sent you a link at some point. Quite a few of our friends do it. But then they say to me, oh, Nick, I feel like I see you all the time, but I forgot you're on the TV. You're not in real life.
I think that's why I listen to the podcast. I get a weekly dose of you.
You get a weekly dose of me having some questions. But listen, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to do this with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I'm really grateful that you're here, and I'm loving building this community with you all. Make sure you click the follow button so you don't miss an episode. New ones come out every Monday. And if you found today's content helpful, it would mean a lot if you left a 5-star review, or even better, shared it with someone you think would enjoy it too. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.